This is going to be a special edition of the Grace Watcher Report. We're going to be sharing about the Archons. It's Archons. You're going to have to sit back and listen to this. You may have to take some notes. You might even have to come back and listen to this again. There are strange demonic forces that are in this world. And you need to know what they are, who they are, where they come from, and this whole ideology. And so, without further ado, let's begin to listen to this special.
In the 1940s, in Nag Hammadi, in Egypt, just up from Luxor on the Nile, a sealed jar was found. And in that were writings from this Gnostic people, the pre-Christian Gnostic people. They were the people that ran the great library at Alexandria. Another expression of Gnostic thought later was the Cathars in southern France. And this sealed jar, one of the great things about it is, unlike biblical texts and other texts that have been in the public domain over a long period of time, they can be changed and manipulated. This has been in a sealed jar. So what you get is what they are. And they talk about this force called the Archons, manipulating human affairs. They relate the Lord Archon, or demiurge, as they called it, to the Christian, not only the Christian devil, but to the Christian, to the Old Testament God.
It's all about the references, because Archons in Islamic would be the jinn, and of course in Christianity they'd be known as demons or daemons, but all one of the same, and said to be these servants to the demiurge. Now, the Archons are said to be consist of positive and negative, so those which are spiritually good beings and focus on obtaining energy through prayer, idolism, those sort of things. And of course, the opposite side of the coin, as we always have, just as in the demonic and the jinns, is that we have these dark entities, the Archons negatives, which are said to thrive from illness, trauma, sadness, bad things, those sort of things, the real negative things in life. The inverse religious side of the Archons is that they stood for everything opposing what was good or natural, or what we would say is a good aspect of religion. That is carried on into satanic realms, being the upside down pentagram, which is essentially upside down, the cross, upside down cross. How many times do we see a horror film, a paranormal film, where the demonic possession, is associated with symbolism of an upside down cross? It's kind of leaked through slowly into society and into the movies and into the 21st century. But the fundamental thing about the Archons, being positive and negative aspects of that, are still very much real in the 21st century, even nowadays.
They say that the Archons in their prime form are basically energy, awareness, very distorted awareness, but an awareness. But they can take form, these writings say, and about a fifth of these writings were about the Archons. Guess the two forms that they describe that these Archons take. One, reptilian. Second, a form that looks like a grey fetus with big black eyes. The Gnostic writings talk about the Archons in terms of they have a great ability to manipulate and create fantasia. In other words, they can create false realities that the target thinks is real. And so we've got to keep that in mind when we are trying to understand what's going on. That I see, in UFO research and in alien research, as they call it, they're still obsessed with the physical. They still have this idea of physical beings flying around in physical spacecraft, when actually that is, at least often, if not all the time, they're just projections into this reality that we see. And the real point of manipulation of human affairs is going on way beyond what we can perceive as a reality.
They are absolute masters in deception. This is the biggest thing about the Archons. It's all about the deceit. We see this throughout most phenomena, be it the paranormal, and honestly, be it the ufological as well. It's kind of all wrapped up in this nice little back of deception. What is the aliens? Are they really truly what they represent to be? Maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, the references go back to 1,600 years ago of grey, small beings with baby-type skin, which were grey, and large, dark eyes that never moved. What are them if they are not the small greys of today? That was 1,600 years ago, these references. And not just that. I mean, people have talked about reptilians, these reptile-type beings, for many years. When initially researchers came out with it, they were laughed out of the camp, to be honest with you. People just dismissed it, called them nuts. But now scientists are coming forward and say the likelihood is that, if there are entities out there in space, there is a very good, strong possibility that there may be some derivative of our dinosaurs that once lived here 65 million years ago. There does seem to see some evidence within original scriptures of their existence, be it the greys, be it the reptiles. But the thing is, this deception, the Archons have the capability of inverting it. In other words, what you think you are experiencing is nothing of what you're experiencing. It's what they want you to see, what they want you to feel, and what they want you to think. And that's complete and utter deception.
As far as the Archons are concerned, I believe the reptilians and other negative beings that work for the reptilians, that have an agenda inimical to the human race here on Earth and throughout the solar system, all the different human races throughout the solar system, they are manifestations of this archontic influence. So the reptilians are archontic in nature, the negative greys are archontic in nature, the mantis beings that are doing agendas that are not in humanity's best interests are aspects of this archontic influence, because archon means like ruler, hidden ruler. I do believe there is some pervasive energy that has a consciousness of its own. And it permeates the entire galaxy, but it's parasitical in nature, and it seems to have a consciousness, and it seems to work through all these archontic beings. And there are negative archontic beings in other planes and other dimensions that plug into our reality. They've manipulated things here, so we have this miasma of sorrow, grief, rage, and pain, and hatred. And all those negative base emotions nourish these negative beings at our expense.
Now, there is talk certainly within the ET research community, about these archontic type forces having enslaved certain groups of ET races, particularly the ones we consider negative. That would be certain factions of the Greys, certain factions of the Reptilians. In fact, probably certain factions of every race that this archontic force has been in contact with. Now, one has to decide, is this purely a get out of jail free card for these alien races that choose to manipulate and persecute and parasitically feed off mankind? Or is it true that these ET races are themselves and have themselves fallen victim to this archontic force? I'm not quite sure which one of those. I certainly believe that it could both be true.
When we talk about demonic possessions, though it's very similar to other experiences. I mean, many, many years ago, people were shedding entities by crossing water. That's what it was believed to be. You can shed an attachment by crossing water. Schizophrenia was addressed and cured in third world countries as that as a possession, casting out a demon, and literally cured people which were suffering from schizophrenia, as far as the records say. It's all down to who are really hearing voices, and is there really something more to it than that? Though I've had first hand of that illness, through family members, and I can say, it's a terrible thing to try and deal with, because you're dealing with something that invades somebody else's personality, and they hear things and they act to them. It's as if like the puppets on a string sometimes. It's a terrible illness. But there may be other ways of dealing with this, and they certainly have done in third world countries. Now, what's interesting about possessions is that according to Christianity and their rules and their information, would suggest that demons want to exist in our reality. So they're envious. They want to live in our reality. And there's nothing more rewarding than literally taking the soul of an individual. So when possession takes place, what their ultimate achievement is that person literally dies whilst they're in possession, because they've gathered their soul. It's like a great tip-off sheet. Hey, that's a big one for me. That's how they kind of see it, that this internal battle's going on. And it was simply because they were against human creation, that God created us. And of course, that's their kickback.
I think if you look at diseases like schizophrenia and neurological disorders, there are a handful of researchers now with scientific qualifications, scientific backgrounds in either counselling or psychotherapy that are seriously questioning some of the patient's motives, looking deeper into the research about what is potentially behind just some of these cases, not all of them. And I think there is some serious investigation being done into that at the moment to see whether there is something else behind this, not just a deterioration of cells within the brain or some sort of imbalance within the chemistry. A lot of researchers and scientists are looking at this now seriously to see whether there is some sort of force manipulating these certain individuals. And these certain individuals seem to have hidden pathways to us, that allow these entities in, whether that be a low vibrational state through depression or through perhaps drug use, whether it's a DNA soul connection, like some of these researchers talk about.
I see television programs like on History Channel, and they're very good, I'm not knocking them, about ancient aliens and things like this. But just like humanity in general, not least because we're programmed to see the world that way, they still are looking at what we call the physical. In other words, they're searching for what's going on within this tiny frequency range we call visible light, which humans are basically blind in what we can actually code into a reality we can perceive. And to understand, I would suggest, the nature of the non-human manipulation of human affairs, we've got to understand that reality is not solid. This is holographic. It's illusory solid.
There was a movie that Stephen King came up with years ago called The Langoliers that depicted these Pac-Man looking kind of weird creatures that just gobbled up space-time and always seemed to be chasing the protagonist. I believe there's something to that. And this energy field, whatever it is, has a consciousness.
Is it an influence? The influence? And I know that there's a researcher, Barry Fitzgerald, and he's wrote an excellent book called The Influence. And this is what it is. This is the influence. Is it changing society, our mindset? Is the tide turning to more a negative stance? And that we're having to live in a world like that? The reason is that people might say, well, what's behind that? Are we driven? Is this something changing society, changing the consciousness of humanity to be more like this?
I think you would have to be blind not to really take a good look at the planet and the people on the planet to know that it's in quite a serious negative state. And one has to ask the question, is this being done purposely? And I've asked for a long time, as many others researchers have, what kind of entity destroys its own world? And people will talk about money and power, but I believe it goes way beyond money and power. You have to ask yourself the question where knowingly, or some of those in power, some of the people behind some of these black operations are knowingly committing, you might say, crimes against humanity, certainly crimes against the earth. And one has to ask the question, would a human being born of the earth, or Gaia, as some researchers call it, do that to its own environment? And I find that hard to believe. So the idea that there is a force manipulating, or many forces, which I suspect that it is, not just one, manipulating events and agendas and individuals here, I think that's certainly something that is happening openly within politics and government. We can see that. There's deep corruption. So just look at that. Just look at the corruption you see within your job where you work, and imagine the sort of corruption and darkness that goes on behind the scenes in these high echelons where the people that go by no name operate.
They're like they're computer-like. And this description of the Archons in these Gnostic texts, in our language, describe them as like computer-like and mechanical. That they had no ability for creative imagination, what the writings translated call intentionality, what I would call creative imagination. Put simply, if you gave them a blank sheet of paper, they couldn't create anything. But give them a piece of paper with something on it, and they can piggyback it and twist it and distort it. And when you look at the behavior of these hybrid reptilian bloodlines, you look at the behavior of this archontic force, it's like, and I think in many ways it's more than just like, what we would call a computer virus, in the sense that if you look at a computer virus, it doesn't create anything. What it does is lock into and piggyback operating systems already created and distort them and twist them. And that's what's happened to our reality, exactly that. The reptilian genetics, I think it takes a reptilian form so often because that genetics is a holographic, energetic, thus genetic expression of this computer-like, non-creative, highly predictable force.
Those people who have experienced and said they've experienced Archons, which is very interesting, claim that they saw them to be kind of transhuman. When I say transhuman, I mean that they seem to be artificial intelligence added to them, cyborgy, if you know what I mean. They kind of walk around as if they're kind of mechanical, biological systems, kind of fused together in some way, half robotic. Maybe that's the way we're going. We know that. Absolute guarantee that science is looking at those sort of things, how we can better ourselves, how we can clone parts of our bodies, how we can introduce mechanical systems to work with us in our bodies, which would make us last longer. I mean, by 2050, they said that, I'll give you a typical example. Scientists are now saying the first 200-year-old person is already alive. Is already alive. And that basically means is that someone, be it a child out there, is going to live to 200 years of age.
When you've got a force that wants to take over human society, human life, the human mind, you're not going to have deals done that are in any way beneficial to humanity. And that's interesting that you should bring this up about technology. Very, very important area. One of the themes of the archontic reptilian mind story is the obsession with technology. And what is technology? It's a way of making up for the inability to directly create without technology. And so technology overcomes the inability to access much higher levels of possibility beyond anything that most people would think was possible, but absolutely is, in other states of awareness. And there was a project called the Charney Project, which a whistleblower came out to talk about just a few years ago. There was a series of pieces in Nexus magazine about it. And the Charney Project claims this, that some time ago in Africa, at something akin to a smaller version of CERN, they accessed an entity in another dimension of reality through technology, through a computer system, and asked the entity, it says, 20,000 questions. And I was extremely interested when I read it because of what the entity said, that this reality is manipulated by a reptilian race and that it happened in their reality, but they got rid of them. And again and again and again, and once more, the reptilians are obsessed with technology. Technology is their God. And look what's happening to our world. It's being taken over. The human mind, perception, human behavior is being taken over by technology. If you talk for long enough, everything connects to everything else. The archontic force, which expresses itself in reptilian form, cannot create. It can only piggyback. And what it's done and what it's doing is piggybacking how reality actually works in terms of the way we decode reality. And it's like a virus, it's creating or having humans create this technological collective mind, which will, in technological terms, mirror the way reality works, but actually will override it. And the transhumanist agenda is to get technology, the word keeps coming up all the time, into the human form so that it gets pulled further from its true infinite self and its ability to perceive beyond this reality. That's what transhumanist agenda is all about.
If we ourselves are being manipulated against our will, psychologically, by this negative force, it certainly makes sense that they would have the power, much like the Borg I mentioned earlier of Star Trek fame, that seem to parasitically embed themselves within certain races and conquer them from within. Sometimes covertly, in some cases more overtly. But I certainly think it's worth considering.
Because it's a distortion of prime reality, it does not have a natural energy source. The only energy source a distortion can feed off is another distortion. It cannot feed off prime reality because it cannot lock into it. It cannot interact with it. And one of the themes, again, picked up over the years, is this reptilian archontic force in its various expressions is terrified of humanity waking up. Why? Because its food source is gone. Our emotional state, our mental state, our state of awareness, our state of behavior, which is an expression of that state of awareness, is energy. It's an energetic force, and it has a frequency. And this distortion can only feed off distortion. And what it's doing is feeding off human distortion. What it's done is manipulated humanity to create a society which has created energetic distortion among the target population through hatred, anxiety, fear, the big one. These are all expressions of fear anyway, of depression, hatred, all these things. And so as humans manifest those states, they are manifestations of those frequency states, and the distortion can feed off the distortion that the humans are projecting. And so a war to conscious people is a nightmare. To the archontic force, it's lunch. In fact, it's a banquet. People dying of hunger, people dying of disease. They feed off death, which has a frequency. They feed off decay and destruction, which have frequencies, and they're all within this frequency of distortion.
I don't think there's anyone out there that can't see the world is turning into a very horrible place, and actually humans are turning quite horrible. There are a lot of people that you'll hear people say, I don't like people. And I don't think, I mean, you've always had the one or two individuals that would say that, but I'm hearing that more and more. People don't want to be around people, and I think it's the empaths and sensitive people that are picking up on these negative, horsed individuals.
If we change our state of being and project a different energy, we cease to be a battery. You know, in the Matrix movie, when the Morpheus character held up the battery and said the machines, technology, have turned humans into one of these. Exactly what's happened. And we don't have to be. But we've been, I mean, you have only got to go onto an internet forum or an internet comments section on anything and see the level of hatred and vitriol that exists within humanity. That's all feeding the force that's taking their freedom away. But they're so programmed, they think they're intelligent, they think they're free. They're not. They're just expressions of this archontic force, which gets them. It's like a feedback loop. We'll put you into this state of being, you create that energy. As a result of that state of being, we feed off that state of being. It's literally like a machine, a biological machine they've got going, and that's what they feed off.
You have been listening to a Chris Turner production. And also, the Grace Watcher Broadcasting Network. This is Apostle Paul Lee Jones, and I am a Native American preacher, and I preach to the called, to the chosen, and to the faithful.